Indian political thought during the colonial period had several dimensions. It is true that ultimately the Gandhian political thought turns out to be the most important and the most significant, but there is no doubt that the socialist Indian political thought is equally an important chapter and constitutes one of the most significant phases of Indian colonial period. The socialist political thought was shaped by several important persons like Acharya Narendra Dev, Jayaprakash Narayan, and Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia. Now, Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia was a very important and towering personality not only during the colonial period but even after independence. He played a very crucial part both outside the parliament and also inside the parliament as a member of the legislature. So, in this lecture and in the following lecture, we will be discussing Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia in every detailed manner possible, and for our convenience, we will be focusing upon the activities that Dr. Lohia indulged in this lecture, and in the following lecture we will be focusing upon the key features of his political thought that we come to know from his writings and from the activities in which he was engaged. Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia was born in 1910 at Akbarpur in Uttar Pradesh. His father Hira Lal was a scholarly person who was interested in pursuing education of his son, and his mother Chanda, she was a school teacher too. Lohia lost his mother at a very early age when he was just 2.5 years old. He was brought up by his father and his paternal aunt, and in fact he remained very close to his father throughout his life. That he was a great organizer became evident when he was just a schoolboy. He organized a kind of procession of his school friends when Lokmanya Tilak departed to pay homage to this great leader. Thereafter, Lohia went to Bombay for his matriculation, and after completing his matriculation, he went to Benares Hindu University for his intermediate degree. Thereafter, he completed his honors graduation in English from Kolkata's Vidyasagar College, and so it is quite evident that from a very early age he used to travel a lot, and throughout India he was quite a known person. In fact, his father always encouraged him to pursue education further, although his family had a business background, and in fact this family was engaged in iron business for a long time, and that is why he acquired the surname Lohia. But Lohia was interested in pursuing his studies, and so he went to England for further studies. However, he didn't like the British attitude, the attitude of the British people and other associated things, and so he left England and went to Berlin for his further studies. There he completed his PhD thesis. This PhD thesis was on the salt satyagraha and the economic aspects of it that were relevant for India. It may be mentioned here that when Lohia was a child, his father took him to Gandhi for just an informal meeting. But this meeting had a very lasting impression on Lohia. He remained a Gandhian throughout his life, although later on, and particularly when he was staying in Berlin, he became acquainted with socialism and the socialist policies and practices, but he never ignored Gandhism, and till the end of his life he remained a Gandhiite as well as a socialist political thinker. On his return to India, Lohia in fact first thought that he could sit in the All India Civil Services examination. But later he realized that by doing this, or by becoming an ICS, he actually would serve the British state and the British policy. He therefore decided not to take any job. However, Birla, the great industrialist of that time, offered him the post of private secretary to him. He accepted it and he remained in that job for some time, but he realized that that job, or for that matter any kind of job, was not meant for him. Therefore, he left that job and came to Calcutta for doing kinds of political movements or political struggles. In fact, at around that time, in 1934, the Congress Socialist Party was formed. Lohia became a member of this party and, in fact, worked full-time for this particular party. In 1936, when the communists were allowed by this party, Lohia, in fact, firmly opposed this move, but his opposition could not be taken into consideration, and as most of the leaders accepted the communists, Lohia had no final say in it, but he remained very much against this policy because he believed that the communists had a different kind of path, and particularly they always took their decisions under the Russian Communist Party and the Comintern, which was totally disliked by Lohia. So ultimately, in 1940, the Congress Socialist Party expelled the communists from its fold, and Lohia became happy with the decision because now it was the socialists who would in fact dominate this socialist party. Now, from 1939 onwards, Lohia became very active in different kinds of political movements and protests. In 1939, he toured throughout India and made several speeches and asked the people to refrain from cooperating in any manner with the British government because the Second World War broke out by that time, and Lohia believed that by totally dissociating from the British policy and the British way of life, the British could be put under some kind of pressure. But at that time, he was arrested for his speeches and he was sent to the Sultanpur Kotwali prison, which was a notorious place at that time and in fact earned notoriety for all kinds of assaults that took place inside the prison on the prisoners. Lohia, in fact, was a victim of a very severe assault inside the jail. But at that time, political pressures and other pressures were mounting for Lohia's release, and ultimately he was released in 1942. Now, in 1942, the Quit India resolution was adopted and accepted by the Congress Party, and the leaders went for the Quit India movement. But before the dawn on the 9th of August, all the front-ranking leaders of the Congress were arrested. Now, the mantle was on the Congress socialist leaders to carry on the movement. Lohia did a great job at that time. He went underground, and at that time, a Congress radio was in practice, and Lohia made several speeches from his hideouts, and those speeches were broadcast and people could listen to those speeches and could understand what the movement was all about, how this movement was going on. Now, he in fact shifted his residences on several occasions in order to avoid arrest. and finally he could not find any safe place and he went to Nepal for hideout along with Jayaprakash Narayan. By going to Nepal, Jayaprakash Narayan and Ram Manohar Lohia were able to hide themselves from the British police forces, but there also Lohia was engaged in the popular upsurges that were going on in Nepal at that time against the Nepal monarchy. So ultimately, both Jayaprakash Narayan and Ram Manohar Lohia were arrested and they were put in the Nepalese prison. But they, in fact, both of them were able to to come out from the prison in night, and they were able to come out in the Indian soil. But after coming into India, Lohia was arrested again and was sent to the Lahore jail. Now, in this Lahore jail could in fact devise certain policies and plans by which any incident that was occurring inside the jail could remain under secrecy and no one was able to know anything about Ram Manohar Lohia at that time. Everyone was in the dark about the whereabouts of Ram Manohar Lohia, and Lohia inside that Lahore jail faced tremendous assault and tremendous kind of oppression. He was not even allowed to sleep even for a while by the jail warden, and all kinds of pressure were put upon him so that he could dissociate himself from these kinds of political struggle. But Lohia was a completely different kind of person. He was only interested in the upliftment of his countrymen, in establishing a socialist kind of society, in bringing about economic equality. He was ready to face all kinds of assaults inside the jail. Ultimately, when the Labour Party came to power in England, the Labour Party, when declared that they would allow and they would grant the Indian independence, some kind of comforts could be noticed in Indian places too, and Lohia, along with some other political prisoners, were made free, and he came out of prison and participated in different kinds of other activities that were going on around that time. In fact, in 1949, a world conference on socialism took place at Stockholm. Lohia participated in that conference, and by his fiery speeches and his oratorial skill, he was able to impress the audience there. Thereafter, after the adoption of the Indian Constitution, a kind of camaraderie within the different political parties could be noticed, but Lohia was very adamant on one particular issue, that the Congress should adopt a kind of economic policy that would ensure a socialist kind of society, an egalitarian kind of society in India. But if the Congress failed to adopt this policy, Lohia would be the first person to dissociate himself from all kinds of Congress policies and all kinds of government policies. In fact, when the Congress government under Nehru's leadership did not accept any such kind of policy or program, Lohia dissociated himself from the Congress and the Socialist Party, which at that time became Socialist Party after its sacrificing the prefix Congress. Lohia got involved in several other movements and protests under the leadership of the Socialist Party. However, the Socialist Party, with the merger of the Kisan Mazdoor Party in 1952, became the Proja Socialist Party, and Lohia had some major differences with other leaders of the Proja Socialist Party on certain issues. Leaders like Ashok Mehta, Minu Masani, Sucheta Kripalini, they were in favor of cooperating with the Congress, but Lohia was very much different, had very different views with them, and tried to pursue a kind of policy which is totally on his own and totally different from the Congress policies. In 1955, at the Avadi Congress session, when the Congress party adopted the resolution that a kind of socialistic pattern of society would be established in India, the leaders of the Praja Socialist Party argued that there is no point now to dissociate itself from Congress. Rather, it would be better if we cooperate with Congress for ushering in a socialistic pattern of society. But Lohia believed that this kind of phrases and these kind of adoption of policies were only paper policies and nothing concrete would happen. So he argued that he would pursue his goal of establishing socialist society in India, dissociating itself from the Congress. Another important point that created some kinds of differences between Lohia and other socialist leaders or other leaders of the Praja Socialist Party was with question of participating in the elections. The other leaders were in favor of contesting elections. Lohia argued that without going into this power struggle, it would be better if we concentrate ourselves in organizing the people for creating a socialist kind of society. So these differences remained, and ultimately in 1955, Lohia dissociated himself from Praja Socialist Party and created the party of his own called the Socialist Party. He remained with this party till his end in 1967. So a division within the socialist movement or the socialist political thought was created in 1957 when Lohia dissociated himself from the Praja Socialist Party and created his own party called Socialist Party. Apart from this, Lohia got engaged in several protest movements like in Azamgarh, in Mysore, on issues which are particularly pertinent to the toiling masses. For instance, in Azamgarh, there were some wrong entries in the Land Reforms Bill, and these wrong entries created troubles and enormous economic losses to the peasants. The peasants started protest against this, and Lohia came forward and helped them and in fact gave leadership to these peasants' protests. In Mysore, there was the government in fact escalated the price of the canal water that were used by the peasants for their irrigation purpose. This increase of the rates of canal water naturally disturbed the peasants who were incurring economic losses. Now Lohia again came forward and sided with them and carried forward these movements. Now, at that point of time, another important incident occurred at Kutch in Gujarat. There, a kind of India-Pakistan enmity or animosity took place when some people were thought to be pro-Pakistanis and were arrested on that ground, who were actually the residents of Kutch and were not proclaiming or declaring any such things. But the government did not believe them and they were arrested. Lohia again came forward and sided with them. At that point of time, Lohia was branded as anti-Indian, anti-nationalist, and again was arrested. Now, this arrest particularly, in fact, broke Lohia's mind to a great degree because this was done on the pretext that Lohia was anti-national. This naturally disturbed this person who throughout his life worked for his own countrymen and was arrested by the government. The chief of which government happens to be a close friend of his and who had a good relation for many years. Now, in 1962 general election, Lohia was pressed to contest that election, and he was not at all in favor of contesting election because he always believed dissociating himself and also his party from the corridors of power struggle. But he was forced to contest that election, and he contested that election against Nehru. He was fielded as a candidate against Nehru, and all sorts of campaign were going on in this particular constituency because the Congress knew that the winning or the victory of Nehru is very, very important at that particular point of time, because the country was passing through some kind of trouble and tension. Already there was an Indo-Pak war in the 1950s, and the Chinese aggression was taking place at that time. So victory for Nehru was no doubt very crucial, not only for the Congress party, but they believed that also for the strengthening of the Indian nation, this particular victory was very significant. On the contrary, Ram Manohar Lohia, who throughout his life was away from the corridors of power struggle, contested this election on the pressure of his own political party, and naturally he was also interested in winning this particular election. Ultimately, in this election, Nehru won, but Ram Manohar Lohia was able to get sizable votes, and it became clear even to the Congress party that Nehru was not invincible. His popularity and his political policies and measures perhaps were on the decline to a certain extent, and that is why it was possible for Ram Manohar Lohia to get the votes of so many people who were against Nehru, who was the prime minister of at that time for more than a decade. But ultimately in 1963, in a by-election from a separate constituency, Lohia won and he became a member of the parliament, and the final phase in Lohia's life started from that time onwards. This was Lohia as a parliamentarian. Lohia made his impression within the parliament too. In fact, in 1964, Nehru died, and the next Prime Minister, Lal Bahadur Shastri, came in. It seems that Lohia was perhaps more critical of Nehru and Nehru's policies, and perhaps a bit lenient to Lal Bahadur Shastri, to whom he had a great personal regard for his honesty and for his statesmanship. Finally, however, we know that in 1966, Shastri died and Indira Gandhi became the Prime Minister of India. And Lohia, in fact, targeted his attacks to Mrs. Gandhi too, and he criticized Mrs. Gandhi and all her so-called populist policies on the ground that they were not at all meant for the common people. However, this phase did not last long, and in 1967, in spite of the best medical treatment that was given to him, Lohia died. A very colorful, adventurous, praiseworthy chapter of the Indian political thought and Indian political system ended, and a great personality who did participate in various kinds of struggles before and after independence came to an end. And from his writings and the various kinds of movements that he was engaged in, we could get the key features of his political thought, and these features we will be discussing in the next lecture.